You're at work one day, you see something a bit strange, a bit unusual. And so maybe you raise it with your manager. Maybe you email your boss and you say, hey, this is a problem.
I took it up to the most senior levels of management and I was told there is no other option for them. I was not willing to accept that as the final answer.
It's dismissed, it's covered up, and the truth is buried.
Whatever might have happened to a whistleblower, nothing protects them from what happens to their life. Nothing protects them.
It's not just a question of having lost that job, but really what do they do next and can they get another job?
And in the worst case scenario, we know that sometimes public servants face prosecution. They face jail time for doing the right thing, for speaking up about wrongdoing within government.
My legal fees are $3 million and they haven't finished.
If you knew what you might face, would you take that on?
Come on in. My name's Jacinta O'Leary. I've been a nurse for 31 years now and a midwife for 13. I was the sole parent. I brought up my son on my own. Big family, lots of nieces and nephews, so I had a pretty busy life. It was 2017. Nauru was advertised being part of this Australian medical team. I didn't agree with offshore processing. I didn't agree with that policy. I didn't really feel like I could do anything about it. But what I thought I could do was be part of a medical team that could deliver good quality healthcare to the refugees, and I thought that would be a really significant and valuable contribution that I could make to their lives. So that's why I went.
The Australian government is launching a video blitz aimed at discouraging asylum seekers from boarding boats bound for Australia. It follows the federal push to reopen Manus Island and Nauru.
From now on, any asylum seeker who arrives in Australia by boat will have no chance of being settled in Australia.
If you have a valid claim, you will not be resettled in Australia. You will never live in Australia. If you are found not to be a refugee, you will remain in this camp until you decide to go home.
According to the government, by the end of 2015, 1,459 asylum seekers were being held offshore.
These people, they don't think, they don't care what happened to us. They care about only to punish us.
A lot of those people, the accommodation they were given was tents. Some people were living in tents for 5 years. Tents that were mouldy, that offered little protection from the intense heat and the torrential rain, and that was their completely inadequate shelter. And it was really, really uncomfortable.
Nauru is the worst place I've ever seen. We just want to go to Australia and we want to make our future very bright.
The Nauru hospital, there were cockroaches, mosquitoes, inadequate ventilation. I thought, oh, okay, I'll just work with what I've got. We'll do our best. But then I realised within a few weeks that it was a farce of a health system. And when I got to Nauru, there were about 50 people on a list that needed to go to Australia for medical conditions that couldn't be treated, things like renal stones, things like, you know, chronic back pain, knee injuries, gynecological problems, heart problems, blood pressure problems that just couldn't be managed. And these people were just not moving. You know, a renal stone is like one of the most painful things that you could imagine. There was people there who'd had renal stones for over a year and had recurrent infections and terrible pain, and they weren't being moved. And I just couldn't believe this was happening. People were deteriorating physically and mentally in front of my eyes, and that was an awful thing to witness. And the other people around me, other health professionals around me, were just going with it. We're going, this is just a system. And I'm thinking, are you really accepting this? It's just such a difficult thing to reconcile. I couldn't work out what was happening for quite some time. Yeah, so I just sort of stayed in my room and went to work, yeah. After my first 6 weeks and I was going home, I wasn't actually even sure I was going to come back because it was such a difficult place to work. And then I decided, I would come back for another 6 weeks. But I decided that, I was really going to work hard for the refugees. I knew exactly what I was walking into and that I was going to work harder for them. I still didn't really realise then I was going to be a whistleblower. I just knew I was going to challenge the system that was there.
Well, Matt, it was a special meeting of council with just one item on the agenda, the fate of its CEO, Sharon Kelsey. Outside the chamber, a tearful Sharon Kelsey hugged supporters and staff. Mayor Smith, who's being investigated by the Crime and Corruption Commission, wasn't present at the meeting.
That was hard to watch. You're just trying to do the right thing. And it's sometimes a very precarious road to travel, and I think that just brings it home when I watch that. My name's Sharon Kelsey. I'm a barrister and a solicitor by profession. In 2017, I took up the role with Logan City Council as the Chief Executive Officer. In Queensland, the local government is a significant business. A number of councils have budgets which are $1 billion a year, and they're very politically powerful. I went up to the council just prior to formally commencing, and I met staff. That was the first time I became aware that there was inquiries into local government in Queensland, significant inquiries. When I first started, I wrote a personal letter to every single staff member, and part of that outlined the fact that issues like integrity were really central for how we were going to move forward as an organisation. So it was literally, I don't think it was day one, it was certainly day two, that people started to make appointments with me, and it didn't take long in the conversation before they would raise issues that had been concerning for them. And so I just found that there was this endless line of staff that wanted me to know the concerns that they had with the practices that had been occurring in council. What I was doing was really going back, double-checking information. That ran over a period, a build-up of about a month or more, and so there was an increasing level of stress that went with that. But once you've formed the view, there's no going back. You've got to report it. October, I made a public interest disclosure to the council and to the Crime and Corruption Commission.
Australia, over the past 3 decades, has gone from leader to laggard in the whistleblowing space. We began to have whistleblowing laws in the early 1990s in Queensland, coming out of a number of corruption scandals.
Good afternoon and welcome to this special bulletin of 10 News. Queensland's Corruption Commissioner Tony Fitzgerald has delivered a report which virtually upends the way this state has been administered.
This weighty document, the long-awaited report of the Fitzgerald inquiry into corruption.
The Fitzgerald inquiry in Queensland, Fitzgerald said, hey, we need to protect public servants who speak up. And we became the second nation in the world to enact standalone whistleblowing laws. And so then by the mid-2000s, pretty much every state and territory in Australia had whistleblowing laws. We then got whistleblowing laws for the private sector at a federal level in the Corporations Act. And then finally, in 2013, we had the Public Interest Disclosure Act, or the PID Act. There was a review built into it. That review said whistleblowers are suffering, the experience of whistleblowers under this law is not a happy one, and yet the law is still unchanged. So the Human Rights Law Centre has done research that looked at every single whistleblowing case in Australia ever. There's only been one case where someone received compensation under a whistleblowing law in Australia over the past 3 decades. The law enables whistleblowers to go public in certain situations, but those circumstances are so complicated, you've got to jump through all these hoops. And if you don't quite jump through one of the hoops, then your protection falls away.
The PID Act applies to people who work in the public sector, and it's a different whistleblower protection regime than for people who work in the private sector, some of whom, but not all of whom, are covered by the protections under the Corporations Act. There were some revisions to the draft legislation at the last minute. the legislation confined whether a whistleblower was protected or not by reference to who they reported their concern to. It needs to be reported by an eligible whistleblower to an eligible recipient. And whereas that had been fairly broad before, the effect of the change was to limit it to a really, really narrow category of people. Senior managers of corporations, being people who were effectively the CEO or had responsibility for 50% of the financial decision-making in the organisation, or board directors, or a whistleblowing reporting officer. And the reality of that situation is that most ordinary employees don't have access to those people. And although, yes, technically they may have access to a whistleblowing reporting officer, that would require them, first of all, to think they were being a whistleblower, which in my experience was almost without exception never the case. The effect of that meant that pretty much every whistleblower I'd ever acted for in my career would not be protected under the form of the legislation as it was now going to be.
Logan City Council has been labelled the laughingstock of South East Queensland after sacking its CEO.
I don't know why she was sacked. The councillors have never really expressed to me why they don't like her.
My employment was officially terminated, I think it was the 7th of February 2018. I believed I had reasonable grounds to challenge the decision. There is no real protection for whistleblowers. And so the only way that you can right things is to take action yourself. And so that's what I've done. Sit. So this is my family home. My sister and I, we decided that if we pooled our resources, we might be able to restore the church. It's probably about 28 years since we bought the property. And this is one of the earlier plans to make it our forever home, just make it a place that we could welcome our family and hopefully one day grandchildren. This will be one of the key assets that I'll lose in pursuing justice through the court system. My legal fees are about $3 million and they haven't finished. Now that's everything, everything, as I said, my real assets have either been signed over, have been sold or are in the process of being sold. There's this secondary type of ramification. Previously, you were headhunted for roles. You find now that people aren't even returning your calls. You hear people say, we need people to speak out when they see things are wrong. We need that for our democracy. And so on the one hand, we're saying, we applaud you. On the other hand, we're saying, but we don't employ you.
I've seen a lot of difficult consequences for whistleblowers in the workplace. Sadly, the reason people come to see an employment lawyer is often because they've lost their job. One difficult situation that I've seen for a lot of whistleblowers is actually being blacklisted in their profession. So it's not just a question of having lost that job, but really what do they do next and can they get another job? Then, as you can imagine, financial stress leads to all sorts of broader problems, marital and family breakdowns. Most of the whistleblowers that I've acted for have really suffered problems with their mental health as well. It is not that uncommon, I'm afraid to say, to be seeing whistleblowers who've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder.
There's no doubt it takes a terrible toll on your mental health. An impact on myself, has an impact on my husband, and of course, because we're a close-knit family, it has an impact on our children. Are we going to be able to live a life where, it's full again in all of its senses, or has that been taken away permanently from us, and are we just sort of going to live a narrower life? There's this sort of great looming issue that is zapping our energy and zapping our resources and zapping our time, and somewhere we've got to find that space to live around the edge of it.
In 2014, I was working as a midwife in northern Uganda. There were 100,000 South Sudanese refugees. Not once in Uganda did I hear anything detrimental about refugees. All they wanted to do was help them, which was just so different to the conversation around refugees that was happening in Australia at the time. When I got back from my second swing on Nauru, 3 women presented to me pregnant, and they wanted terminations. The way terminations were usually handled, there was a process they went through, and they were transferred to Australia for that procedure, and then they were transferred back to Nauru. As I started to go through the process, nothing was moving, and then I was eventually told, no, they're not going. In the weeks previously, the government had decided to just close that door and to say no woman was going to be transferred from Nauru to Australia for a termination. That's not a reason to transfer her to Australia. They didn't offer any other solution. They just decided to close that door. You can imagine this was pretty awful for the women. Having an unwanted pregnancy and having no way to access a termination, they were starting to self-harm and had plans for suicide, and one had a plan for home abortion, and their self-harming was becoming more frequent and more severe. So I took my concerns to management and I said, look, someone's going to die. We need to find a solution for these people. And I was told this directive is coming from a ministerial level and that's not going to change. And so these women had better get used to the idea of continuing with their pregnancy and birthing on Nauru because there is no other option for them. I was not willing to accept that as the final answer. And I didn't really have a plan. I had never done anything like this before. So I reached out to journalists. Let me find it. So that's the first one that came out. 3 pregnant refugees and nearly 50 others denied medical transfers from Nauru. About midday, 1 o'clock, 4 phone calls, one after the other. My line manager, the manager above her, the senior medical officer. They weren't saying it was me, but obviously they suspected it was me. But they had no proof. After speaking to the journalists, some awareness was raised, but nothing changed. All of these delays just played on the women's mental health so much. And so then I reached out to human rights lawyers. The National Justice Project took the case to the federal court and they won. The federal government was ordered to transfer these women for the care they needed. So it was a wonderful moment for them, and it was wonderful because I knew they weren't going to die then, and I knew that they would stop self-harming, which they did, and I knew that their plans for suicide would stop, and so now they had an avenue in which they could get on with their lives, and so that was a wonderful thing. I know I was suspected. I was being watched. So one time, one of the managers came down with 2 other workers, all men, 3 men, just came in and searched my office. Meant to be intimidating, and it was. And, it did make me feel a bit paranoid and I was anxious. I just had to keep everything really tight. My computer was clean, my phone was clean. Before I went to Nauru, I had to sign a confidentiality agreement saying that I would not speak to media. By breaking that confidentiality agreement, I risked going to jail for 2 years. I had completely resolved that in myself, and if they wanted to put me in jail for 2 years, then go ahead. Yeah, I wasn't frightened of that. I got in touch with the human rights lawyer and I said, look, this is what I've done. What's going to happen to me? And they said, no, they're not going to touch you with a 10-foot barge pole. It would shine a light on exactly what they're trying to hide. So they're not going to touch you. And they haven't for 5 years.
We know that too often those who speak up, including those who speak up publicly, lose their job, they face sector-wide blacklisting, and in the worst case scenario, we know that sometimes public servants face prosecution. They face jail time for doing the right thing, for speaking up about wrongdoing within government. In Australia, we've got 2 whistleblowers right now who are on trial for telling the truth. They are Richard Boyle and David McBride.
Human rights advocates want the federal government to drop cases against Mr. Boyle and military lawyer David McBride.
The fact that these 2 men thought they were following a law that the government now admits is flawed.
I brought the Public Interest Disclosure Act 2013 to the Parliament I was conscious then that we might not have got the scheme completely right.
They built in this statutory review so they could fix it, and yet these two people face jail for trying to use what we now accept is a flawed law to speak up about serious allegations of wrongdoing, unethical conduct in the tax office, and alleged war crimes in Afghanistan. And yet the people facing legal consequences, the people facing justice, are not the perpetrators of the alleged wrongdoing, but the two men who told the truth, allegedly. We need our politicians to continue to demonstrate the importance of whistleblowing through reform, through internal changes. We know how to fix these things, we just need to do them.
If you think about someone pushing a fire alarm when they see a fire, that is going to trigger a warning system that gets people out of the building and hopefully protects people's lives. What we're asking people to do is that when they see something that's gone wrong, to speak up. Now, if there's more risk in speaking up than the possibility of protection, people aren't going to speak up and we're all going to lose out. So I think the role that whistleblowers play is invaluable, and really it's in all of our interests that people are encouraged to speak up rather than scared to.
Whistleblowers matter because they expose wrongdoing and require us to confront it and to change. Whistleblowing is about the truth, and the truth matters.
They were just trying to hide all these human rights abuses. And to a large extent they did. You know, whistleblowers have come out, refugees have come out and told their stories, but there's so much more to be told.
Do you like your job? Do you want it back?
I love my job. Absolutely love my job. You're looking in on yourself, and I look at how resolute I was and I think that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed at all. When the pages of history are written for the final time in relation to it, I'm sure I will be on the right side of that history.
In an environment where governments or companies are quite willing to have policies that do not uphold human rights, then yeah, whistleblowers are imperative, and laws protecting whistleblowers are imperative. They need to be protected.